Okay, Allison and Pastor Brian are going to jump around. If you have questions for Paul, we'd love to answer those. I do have one just to get us started while you guys are all thinking. And it's not overtly about faith and work, but I do have to call out or at least what I saw was, a clear, between the syncretism and the escapism.
Yeah.
You must have maybe guessed that they definitely look a lot like our sort of political party system. And I'm sure it's not as cut and dry or as clear as that, obviously, but
right.
Have you seen that play itself out in that way where, escapism feels a little bit like a Republican Party and syncretism feels like a little bit like Democrat?
That's a good analysis. I haven't. I hadn't actually made that connection, though. I think it's a fair one. And I think you can chart a lot of kind of like conservative and progressive Christianity on the same scale. So there's a lot of things you can kind of put in those buckets. But politically, I think the analogy holds true because the call is to not be defined by those buckets, but to find that middle space and to live in tension with, again, maybe even the alliance and allegiance model is hopeful politically to say, yeah, I'm allied with this position or I'm allied with that position, but my allegiance is to this call of what it means to represent God in the world, which is not perfectly defined by any system.
Yeah, that's really good. Should write that down. Questions? Because otherwise, I'll just ask them all.
Hello? Oh, okay. Hold on a second. Let me open my phone. So the question I wrote down was, and it was based on the circle diagram as well. How do you identify when your discomfort from your environment is a byproduct of God's plan for you to stay in that environment and to learn and grow versus a gentle or more firm nudging for you to move on?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, I think sometimes God uses that. I would say probably give a pretty general answer that I think there's three things I think always go into making decisions as a follower of Jesus. There's the text, there's the Spirit, and there's your community. And so I would say if you're being asked at work to violate your principles in a way that you can't live with, and you perceive that from the text, you perceive that from how God has revealed himself, then that could be cause to leave. A friend of mine who's on our council for the nonprofit, she used to work at Roku, and she said that her job, every quarter, she was evaluated by whether she could reduce on average the seconds between when people ended one show and started another. And so her job was just get people to consume more video. She was also raising young children where she was getting people to consume less video. And so she had this tension. At home, my job is to have them not watch as much. At work, I'm literally evaluated by whether I could get people to watch more. And so she went through that, exactly the discernment process you're talking about, and prayed about it and talked with others and ended up leaving her role because she just felt like, I can't in good conscience serve those goals. So I think that's certainly fair. Sometimes it's not as clear cut, but that's where prayer, the community, wise people, all of those things can help contribute to that decision making. It's a great question, though.
Great question. Don't be shy. This is the time.
Hi, enjoyed your talk. So I agree. I think it's clear that man was intended to work. You retire early, they tend to die faster, on and on, the garden, all the way back to the garden. So my question was kind of towards the idea of the implication in Genesis, as you were saying at least, that there was the problem, and that is how it says, but that kind of leads, maybe you can clarify, the idea of man being made for the earth or the earth being made for man. And environmentalists, tend to say, we're just obviously accidents. The earth is more important. The man was made for the earth, whereas I think the Christian principle is the earth is here to serve us, take dominion over it. So I don't know if you want to know.
Yeah, that's a great tension. Really good question. I would say it's a little bit of both. I mean, if you think about the imagery of home, then I think home is a good model, because certainly a home exists for the sake of the people who live in it. But it is not to be, but it ceases to be a home if it's treated improperly. And being a home implies a certain level of care and a certain level of attachment to it. And the other thing I'd add is that in some sense, like, I think a lot of what we are given to do, we are serving the purposes we are given to do, but the roles themselves are serving us by giving us something to do. And so my job, while I am serving my job is serving me by giving me something to engage in and be creative with and use the gifts I've been given. And so I would say it's not super clear cut. Certainly God created humankind as the pinnacle of his creation, and he created the earth to live within it, or for us to live within it. But there's this almost symbiotic relationship between humankind and the land. You see that all throughout the Old Testament. The land is almost personified as part of people's identity. And I think a lot of us feel that way about our homes, about the places we call home. There's this almost blurring of the line. So I'd say certainly I'm really fond of extremes where both of the extremes are bad. And the middle is the way to go. So I would put that on extreme too. If you kind of only believe the earth is made for humankind, that leads to some bad things. If you only believe humankind is made for the earth, that leads to some bad things. So it's a process of marrying those. It's a great question.
That's great. Deanna?
So I'll just say, I love that you were using examples from the book of Daniel, because I've literally had conversations where it's like, how's work going? And I'm like, well, my boss didn't kill me today, so
There you go.
I guess that's good.
No pit of lions, right?
So I'm curious, as in like with the efforts that you're involved with, when you're in faith and work in the programs that you're developing, you're having that network, right? You're identifying believers in positions of influence and trying to come together and do some strategizing. So I've been wondering, on that scale of that spectrum of syncretism to escapism, because I've sort of been intentionally identifying my fellow believers in my sphere, in my organization, and intentionally trying to get them opportunities, get them promotion, getting them project visibility, because I want to see more of my peeps, at leadership level. Is there a risk of that going too far over to the escapism side? Like, I just want to surround myself by more people like me so I don't have to deal with some of this other stuff. Or do you just see it as like, yeah, it's the same kind of strategy that Nebuchadnezzar would use, so why not adopt it for ourselves?
Yeah, that's a great question. The two things. I would say that the desire to network and to build communities of Christians in the workplace is really helpful. So I don't know how many people I've talked to that are like, I worked with this person for 6 years and then I found out they were a Christian. And if that's the story, then something happened that shouldn't have happened, or didn't happen that should have happened. Like, we should be public in a good way with our faith so that it's not surprising to people that we're Christian, and we should be finding other believers at work. Doesn't mean that's, I used to work in tech before I became a pastor, and I was part of a Bible study. Sometimes that was great. Sometimes it was not great, but so you need to kind of find the things that work. In terms of promoting other Christians, I would say, I guess the danger I would see in that is not so much the escapism as the tendency to be viewed as a witness of Christ. I think we are different from other demographics in that we don't just prioritize our own. And so our job is not to kind of get people of our tribe privileges. I think our job is to think broader about the world. And so I think my concern with that, and it doesn't sound like you're necessarily doing this, is to just, ignore people's merits or their qualifications, and to put people and then then Christian just becomes another interest group that looks out for their own as opposed to other and fights for their piece of the pie. And I think we want to avoid that action and the reputation that would come from that action. But certainly in terms of networking and introducing people and building networks, I think that would be great.
It's great. Got a couple, one up front, one in the back.
Thank you. Do you have any suggestions for how to engage conversations around, I don't even know if it's evangelism, but just talking about your faith around coworkers or clientele or whatnot, that it just doesn't come up?
Right. Yeah. I do, though I would say the best source for those is going to be more like around your table, because it's really easy for me to engage my coworkers in conversations about Christ. A lot easier for me than for you, probably. And so that's the kind of thing I can help inspire, but it's been a long time since I've been in the workplace. But I know from people's stories, there's there's kind of the overt things like asking your coworker, what'd you do on the weekend? Hoping they ask you, and I went to church. And so there's kind of little hints like that drop. But I think if those are the kind of maybe the little tricky mechanisms to use, but if you're really engaging your coworkers on a personal level and they're reciprocating and your faith is important to you, then it probably should come out in some conversation. I know that you don't always engage your coworkers on a personal level, and sometimes it's inappropriate to do so, and power dynamics make that tricky if you have direct reports or your manager. So it's so there's kind of the knowledge, but then I think there's also just the character of how do I treat people, how do I make decisions, what are my goals. I think one of the most interesting things in the workplace to demonstrate a Christian value is to look for the people in the room whose voices aren't being heard, and to elevate them. I've observed most workplaces, I worked in software and I was part of a development team, and we had a QA team that was very clearly second tier in terms of the respect they received. And most organizations, in law, you have the partners and the associates and the paralegals and the admin. Every organization has its caste system. And I think one of the unique calls of following Jesus is to take wherever you find yourself, to take the privilege you have and to give it to someone below you. And that's really counterintuitive in the workplace, because most workplaces are strong meritocracies. You have to protect whatever privilege you have to get more. And so to give it away is really remarkable, and people notice. So I don't know if that's a helpful strategy.
Yes, it is.
That's
especially
wonderful.
As a woman.
I can't improve on that, but I do feel like I could
Please,
to add a little bit to it. I think, again, not improving on that, but just thinking about it, who God's made us to be, what's the best version, most redeemed version of ourselves. Sometimes when we think I gotta share the gospel, I've gotta be the most dynamic, extroverted person who draws people unto themselves, and that's just mostly not all of us.
Yep.
And so it's well, what's the best version of me? Maybe I'm the really quiet person, maybe I'm analytical. What do we do most easily and most readily? What is that thing for us? And then allow God to draw people to that, especially if you're in a position where you can't overtly there was a guy, the company I worked for, who he would start his day every single day by just reading the Bible in his cubicle. And that's just what he did. And he didn't bother anybody. He just did it. And he did it for years and years and years until someone actually finally asked him, dude, what are you reading, man? That's a weird looking book. It's gold on the sides. And what is that? And that's the first time someone did, but he was just being who he was, who he was created to be. Yeah. And so I think that's a helpful principle. Just lean into who you are. Don't feel like you need to be anybody else. And do your work with excellence. So
that's huge. It's a really good point.
Yeah.
I'm curious what kind of tactics you've seen people use in remote work environments where it can be really difficult to build relationships and just in my experience, it's hard to be a city on a hill when you're actually a guy behind a Zoom call.
Yeah, a city on a Zoom call. That's a great question. I'm trying to think if I've engaged with that. I mean, I think it begins with personal relationships. And so with remote work, there's just some built-in challenges to that. So I would say try to solve the problem of building real relationships with your coworkers, and the witness part will come with that. So what does that look like if you're remote? Or, if you're ever in person, taking those opportunities. If you're ever, chatting on the side, like taking opportunities to see your coworkers as people. So, asking about their weekend on the side chat or something about that, just finding opportunities to break down the kinds of things that would normally happen in an office setting, trying to make those things happen. I worked remotely before it was kind of a thing. I worked remotely in seminary from 2002 to 2007, and I hated it for that reason. All I did was work. It was like, take all the fun things about work, like collaborating and working with people and solving problems as a team, and you take all of that off, and all you're doing is like producing something. And that was not fun for 4 years. So I'd say try to find creative ways to build those other things in.
Yeah, the all hands meetings at companies on Zoom. I worked on for tech. Like half the people are not paying attention. You guys know.
Yep.
Like they're looking at something else on their laptop. They're not paying attention. It's like almost impossible to create environments for like fellowship, connection, discipleship. Those are almost impossible. One of the things that I did, and you take it or leave it if it's your speed, was, how do I just get time alone with people in a way that just I just want that time. So it's like, can I put 15 minutes on your calendar and then like order you a coffee on DoorDash and like you spend that time with me? Like, please, and just actually be forward and ask those questions, or buy people lunch and send it to their house, or get them a gift card for them to do it themselves, as a way to just get to know people, and then make yourself valuable to them. And if they're especially newer people, like, here's all my expertise. This is what I've learned. This is what I think will be great for you. And just see if you can be a resource to them, and then continually check in, even if it's like on Slack or anything. And here's like a novel idea, which no one's ever thought of. Like, call somebody. Like that's like, if you want a way to stick out in like in an online environment, it's like, don't Slack them or text them. Like, give them a phone call, which that'd terrify them initially. But I found like calling people, they pick up the phone like, oh, Eddie, what do you want? Who's dead? But it's a way to just kind of be different. And I feel like those are like, you're asking for tactics, something. And those are ways that I've been able to have deeper conversations with people. It's just to throw them off with like kindness and service.
That's super helpful. Yeah.
My turn? Okay. I think it's my turn.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you spoke earlier about the fact that work has become something almost like worth worshiping for many people. And I think one of the things I was thinking of for that is the meaning it can give people, and like the value, or like the purpose it gives you in life. But then I was hoping you could speak to the tension between like striving for excellence, which I think, and for me at least, inherently means I'm getting some meaning from the work I'm doing. It's like worth working on, and then like not falling into the trap of like work is giving my life purpose and meaning. And like, you could just speak to the tension, since you like tension so much.
Yeah, I do like tension. Thank you. That's a great question. I mean, I think it's similar to other areas of life, but the challenge is in receiving work as a gift from God. And so whether it's, how do we enjoy the money we have and not feel guilty for spending it, but not be, slaves to it? Well, we receive it as a gift, and it was given to us. It can be taken away. God giveth and God taketh away, that kind of idea. So I think receiving that, how cool. God gave me this job where I can use my education and my creativity, and I can you get in that, people talk about flow, like you get in that, I can like do cool things, and that's, thank you God. Like it's a process of gratitude, and of attributing it to God. One of the tools we use is, regular daily prayers, and that can be part of it, because it's sometimes hard in the moment. Sometimes people talk about the prayer of examine. We sometimes use that as a end of the day prayer to go back over your day and think, oh, God gave me this connection between these two coworkers, or God helped me solve that problem. And just that, I think that gratitude can help with that, to recognize the source, so that it's not the job itself that's giving me meaning, it's God is giving me meaning. And the way he's chosen to do that today is through this job, which then can help when you get fired the next day and you think, my meaning's been taken away, but your meaning hasn't been taken away. God is still there. He's still the source of your meaning, and he's going to find a new avenue to give you meaning. It's just the vehicle that's been changed. So that can help. Is there somebody back here?
Yes, hi. I went to the 9 o'clock service today, and you were talking about labor and work.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping you can clarify that for me in my mind a little bit, because I think what you said was labor's the job. That's what you do to make the money. But work is more like what you do as kingdom work. Could be raising your family and the activities that we do either at church or Bible studies, whatever it might be. So I was thinking, do I need to flip the vernacular on that? Or
yeah, that's a good question. I can clarify. I was using that as a bad example. So maybe that's the starting point, is that I think that distinction isn't helpful. And that came from an interview I was doing with somebody from my church who he had used that language in his mind to separate out the things of his life. And so I think I was trying to use that as, and you're right, I was confused by the language he used as well. But that was the language that made sense to him. I think to go one step further, that's when we think about what we're doing at Faith Work and Tech, the very high level thing of what we're doing is helping people move from what we call disintegration to integration. And that disintegration is what we've been kind of circling around this whole time, is compartmentalization, it's holding back my identity, it's whatever those things we do where we're not kind of fully bringing ourselves to work. And that process of moving from disintegration to integration is what we think of when we think of faith and work discipleship. So we have a whole kind of methodology we use, and we have measures, and we're building this curriculum and all these kinds of things. But so I was using that example as what I would, listening to him describe that, my thought was, this is like the poster child for disintegration. He's describing being disintegrated, but he doesn't realize that it's unhealthy.
Cool. Yeah, I had a question. I don't hear it talked about a lot. I hear a lot about the perspective of when you're inside a company already, and that Jesus can be transformative, and you can be honoring to your worker employee, and then discern if you should still be there or not. Mm-hmm. So I'm in the position where I'm looking where to put my alliances. Yeah. And so what I heard earlier was like, you should want your employer to be successful. Like, I believe that you should do good, honest work. You should want things you pray for them to be successful. But I feel like it's hard now when I look at some of these larger companies and their mission statement of what they define to now be success, like diversity or where they're putting their money. And I'm just heartbroken to even want to apply for them. Like they're a large company, have lots of jobs, and like I want to provide for my family, but at the same time, like I don't want to build this world that I'm giving my son food and shelter so he can walk out the door and deal with the problem that I built for him to deal with. And I get a lot of challenges from people in that, like, well, you just need to provide, go get that job. You go work for that company, because you can just go work for that company. And like, I have such conviction around that. Like, I feel like when Jesus reveals something, like, and I don't know if that's just me, but I don't hear a lot about that because I view it like that. It's an alliance. Yep. I should be aligned with that by choice. I'm not held captive. So I don't hear a lot about how do we build our alliances from the point of choice. Yeah. Yeah, and I would say that's a very personal decision. And so I would say, you need to pay attention to what the Spirit is doing in your heart and in your life, and invite other people into that process and get their perspective on it. But ultimately, if you have that conflict, then you're not going to be able to offer your alliance. And so to go somewhere and not offer your alliance is not going to be, it's going to be hard to be integrated, because you'll just be kind of mailing it in.
And so I think you need to be in a place where you can wholeheartedly offer your alliance. And again, I think objectively on a large scale, the categories where you can do that faithfully is pretty big, as I think Daniel evidences working for Nebuchadnezzar. So I would say objectively, kind of in general, it's possible to work at a lot of these tech companies, but that doesn't mean it's true for everybody. That doesn't mean that's where the Spirit's leading you. So I would say your answer can absolutely be different than somebody else's answer. And that's how God works. So I say follow that if you feel that conviction.
A couple more before we wrap up.
My name is Quentin Thompson, and I deal a lot with caregivers because of my disabilities. I also volunteer for the city of Burien, and I also work for the police department. But the number one challenge that I go through every day is I have a lot of people that ask me how I handle my disabilities, and I give everything to God, and I let God give me the answers that I need to survive in that real world, because I not only do a lot of volunteer work, but I'm training drivers and stuff for wheelchair securements, because my number one thing is safety. And that's what I do for each individual. And I enjoy the volunteer opportunities that I do have, but I've had people for years, since I was 15 years old. They say, how do you handle your daily life and your disabilities?
That's great. Thank you, Quentin. I think that's a really good point. What you've experienced and the witness that you're able to have is that often God's witness comes through most strongly in our weaknesses and in our crises. And I think that's true in our workplaces. People, when we think about living out our faith at work, we think about the workplace and what's happening, but everybody everywhere is going through a crisis every day. And to be able to be connected to them and to have a friendship with them, so when that crisis happens, they might talk to you. You know, if your coworker shows up at work and their spouse just left them, or their child got in an accident, or their parents are dealing with a health crisis, are you gonna be the ones that they'll be like, oh, I just need to tell somebody, so somebody at work knows that I'm carrying this heavy thing? I think just that involves, you might spend years just building a friendship so that then when the crisis hits, you're there. So that's what you experience every day, because your disability is more prominent, and so you're able to give glory to God in that place regularly, which is really beautiful. So thanks for sharing that.
It's wonderful. We'll take two more, and we'll be right.
Hey, I had a question. So at work, I was wondering what you think of this and like how much weight you would say to assign to this. A lot of the times, somebody had mentioned it, that like faith often doesn't come up at all.
Yeah.
Which is like, okay, well, you just got to figure out how to bring that up. But other things come up a lot, like sports or like right now, politics a ton. Yeah. And so my like kind of thinking that I've been thinking about, I was like, oh man, what do you think about this? How much weight would you say to assign to being knowledgeable about those areas, right? Because like my coworkers will talk about these things, and like there'll be some things I know what they're saying, other things I'm not tracking. And so my question is like, how much weight would you say to like assign to like be informed about those things so that you can like have and then like you were saying in the sermon, like point out the God behind their unknown God. Like, is that worth being informed about, like all these different things that your coworkers are talking about? Is it worth on your own time outside of work going and researching those things so that when you come into work, you can be informed about what they're talking about and hopefully like point out the God behind that God. Like, is that worth your time? How much time would you say to give to like researching that sort of stuff? Like,
yeah,
what's
I'd
your
say
thought?
it's worth your time, but it's also, I would say there's some balance between being authentic about the things you're interested in. You know, if you hate sports, but you just force yourself to become knowledgeable, I think it's going to come across as forced.
I don't know. I think it might be worth it.
Yeah, you think it might be, you know, Eddie would differ, but same with politics. But I think, you know, you don't even have to be that informed to say, people are talking about politics and you say, yeah, you know, honestly, like neither party seems to address my core values because my core values come from God rather than from an earthly party. You don't really have to know what the values are. You know, you can just leave it there. But I think that statement of like, yeah, like I actually get what I believe, how I believe the world should work from something other than political parties. That's a helpful statement. I think that would draw questions and interest from people. It's a great question.
One more?
Yeah, my question was kind of going back to your comment about, or your story about somebody in there, you know, the being grilled by HR.
Yeah.
And, you know, hey, did you pray with this person? And
Yeah.
like, to me, there are relationships and positions at work that like, I've actually considered like not going for promotions because I feel like I don't feel safe in my workplace to be evangelistic if an employee has a particular topic, whereas where I am now, I'm an equal.
Sure.
And so I guess I'm kind of looking for maybe a little more specific, or does your organization like track or look at the legalities and the case precedents and like, hey, you know, can a big giant company say you can't talk about your faith, period, to where like somebody's a manager and their employee talks about something personal, and it's like it feels almost idiotic for a manager to talk about faith because you're like, oh yeah, you're getting kicked out for sure, you're getting fired. Yeah. But it's like, what are the legal bases for that? And that's maybe too general, but like I'm super interested in like being wise in the sense of like, maybe God is calling me to be evangelistic in a way that I lose my job.
Yeah.
But I want to know that beforehand. And so I want to know like, here, right? Like,
sure.
I just lost my job. Like, oh, well, I didn't mean to say it that way. I could have done the same. But I think I'm just trying to be wise and navigate the world and the workplace in a way that I'm not being foolish. Right. But I don't know the legalities around those types of things. And does a company have the basis to just say you do not talk about faith, period?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of great themes in there. I would call it a couple. I think your willingness to risk your job for your faith is remarkable, and I think to be applauded. And that's how you can tell how deep an idol has over your heart, is are you willing to risk losing it? And frankly, a lot of people aren't willing to risk losing their jobs over their faith. And you know, you read the book of Daniel, he several times risked his life for his faith. And so do we really think our jobs are that important and that God can't provide through something else if we lose it? And I would say most of the time, what we're actually risking is even less significant than our jobs. It's respect, it's an opportunity of promotion, it's how people view us. You know, not a lot of people end up getting fired for their faith, much less killed, but kind of how much are we willing to risk? And then the last thing I'd say is just, and this may be a personal strategy, I think other people have different approaches to it. I don't know how much legality a company has to legislate their organization's, their employees' behavior, but I would also be hesitant about claiming that unfairness on me. You know, if you look at Daniel as a model, he didn't say, hey, it's not fair for you to throw me in a lion's pit. He got thrown in a lion's pit and God saved him out of it. And so I think to claim that we are being mistreated as Christians, there are some cases where that's really helpful, particularly in places around the world where Christians are persecuted, but it usually is better for one person to claim another person's being mistreated. And so I think that kind of witness of like, I'm being mistreated because of my faith, and I'm going to stand up for my rights. I think there's some dissonance that I feel with that and the approach of Jesus. So I would say endure it and trust God in it rather than try to fight it or try to challenge the company's right to do it. Because then if they don't have the right, it'll be clear when you get fired. It's better exposed by suffering under it, I would say, than by challenging it. I don't know if that makes sense. But that's a hard thing to do.
That's really good. Paul, thank you so much. Hey, will you do us a praying for our church and for the region in this
I would
area?
love to.
To close us out.
Love to. Our Father, thank you that you are all of our Father and you unite us as equals, that you are Father of all on this earth, that you're the one with ultimate authority, not our companies, not our bosses, not our industries or our government officials, but that you are the Father and that we can rest in that. Thank you for the people in this room, the people that were here this morning. Thank you for the earnest desire that is so evident to me to be faithful in this challenging task of integrating faith and work, of being true to our identity in the midst of a workplace that doesn't recognize you. So I just pray your spirit, pray your empowerment, pray your blessing, pray that you would give these folks a sense of your work in them, that you would surprise them at work, even this week, with just a remembrance or a prayer or something that would draw them back to you and help you to see how you're connecting dots in their own lives. And I pray for Eastside, pray for Seattle, pray for this area of the Northwest. What I pray for the Bay Area, I just pray that your spirit would fall on it, that people would encounter you through your church, and that people who don't know Jesus would come to know Christ and enter into saving life and enter into the adventure of what it looks like to serve you in this world. Thanks, God. We pray all this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.